everyone, and welcome to ProWritingAid 101 for business writers. I'm Micah McGuire, ProWritingAid's B2B Digital Marketing Manager, and as always, I am joined today by Tom Wilde, our Head of Client Solutions. It is awesome to see all of you here today. I can really hardly believe that this is going to be our final Business 101 for 2021, and our next is going to be the first of 2022. Very hard to believe that we're already at the end of the year. In any case, today's agenda, we're going to be covering some of the most useful reports for business writers. And then we're going to, if we have time, dive into a little bit about our Chrome extension and some of our favorite tools outside of our reports that are helpful to business writers. So the reports we're going to be covering today are going to be our summary report, the real-time checker and the goals sidebar, the readability report, the sticky sentences report, and the overused words report. So we'll be covering all of those. And if you have any questions, we really want this to be driven by what you guys want to know. Please feel free to pop those into the Q&A box while we're doing the walkthrough. We'll have plenty of time at the end of the session to answer everyone's questions. So if you have something that comes to mind at the end of the session, we can talk then, or we can also get it worked in during the session if it's salient while we're doing the walkthrough. So please feel free to throw those questions out there at any time, just in the Q&A box, and we will get on answering them. If you have a question that we weren't able to answer during the session, please feel free to send it to us at hello, HELLO, at ProWritingAid.com. Just throw in the subject line that you were an attendee at our Business 101, and we'll make sure to get back to you as soon as possible. All righty, well, Tom, I think we can begin.
Fantastic. Thank you, Micah, and welcome everybody. Great to have you with us for this, like Micah says, this last in the year, our Business 101, but we'll be back in January with our next one. Okay, so Micah's given you an idea of the things we're going to walk through in this session. Just want to start by kind of talking a little bit about why people use ProWritingAid, and for business users, it's predominantly that there are some issues we see time and time again. One of the biggest ones is people who end up spending a lot of time rewriting, editing their work or their colleagues' work, and focusing on some of the real easy to fix issues, the spelling, grammar, and style issues, becoming distracted by those and not focusing on, the core things of structure, how you're actually getting your argument across, your positioning in your piece of writing. And that's exactly where ProWritingAid comes in. It doesn't replace the writer and it doesn't replace the editor. But what it does do is take advantage of the kind of technology behind it. So the AI that runs and the rule base that runs behind ProWritingAid, to catch all of those quick wins, those small details that would otherwise distract you. So think of it as a kind of second pair of digital eyes, the editor on your shoulder that's going to sit there just pointing out the mistakes, but also the possible improvements. And a lot of this is down to style. So we'll see some areas tonight that are subjective. They may not be mistakes, but they're sentences or phrases, paragraphs that you could improve to transfer that information from the page to your reader's brain more efficiently, more effectively. That's exactly what ProWritingAid is there to do.
And there's, of course, always the caveat that ultimately you are the writer. You are the one that is in the driver's seat about whether or not you think a certain change might be beneficial or not. There are certain ones of our reports, like our grammar and spelling, pretty black and white. Usually it's either a mistake or it's not. There are others, like our style report, may not necessarily be a mistake. There may be certain cases that you intentionally, let's say, use the passive voice. So again, just remember, you're ultimately in the driver's seat here. We're just here to point out where there may be room for improvement.
Yeah, that's right. And it may only be a small thing that's, prevents your reader getting to the end of your email or your report. So it could be a small thing, passive voice, Mike has mentioned, that frustrates your reader, loses your next piece of business, leaves you with a dissatisfied customer. All those things that you should be, or you can overcome with clear, effective writing. So let's show you how ProWritingAid helps in that process. And it's something that you need to build into your writing process, your writing habit. It's designed to work wherever you write. So there are many, many integrations that we offer. Tonight, or today rather, we're going to show you a couple of them. We're going to do most of the demo in the web editor. But as you'll see, the UI, the user interface in the web editor is exactly the same in our Microsoft Office add-in. So that works within Microsoft Word and Microsoft Outlook. In our browser extensions, so we have extensions for all major browsers, Chrome, Edge, Safari, and Firefox. Also in our desktop app and our Google Docs add-on as well. So wherever you write, we can support you. So let's go ahead and share this screen and we'll get right into it. So I recognize that some of you on today's call may not be familiar with ProWritingAid. Hopefully some of you will recognize this screen and what you're looking at. So we have got, or I have loaded up here, a sample email to a supplier that I've written. And the first thing to notice is your settings button, because in your settings button, you can set your variation of English. What are you using? British, US, Australian, or Canadian English? And that will define things like whether it catches certain spelling variations, S and Z, for example, the difference between some British and US spellings. You can also set your document type. So you'll see that you have a range of categories. We'd assume most of you today are business writers, so you're writing at your place of work. What is it you're actually writing? Okay, so this is an email. So I'll click on email just to set that type. And in a minute, when we do some analysis, I'll show you where this has an impact in the tool. But the really interesting stuff kicks off in the reports tab. And the first thing to do, first thing I'd recommend doing, is setting our real-time checker. Now, some writers like to have this running constantly in the background. Others turn it on and off when they want to check. So maybe at the end of a paragraph or at the end of a section or the end of the document. It's totally up to you. But as you can see, I turned it on and it's found 37 issues in this little red indicator in the top left corner, sorry. And in the document itself, you'll see a whole range of colored underlines, and they relate to the type of issue or error that they found. Now you can see, if you click on this filter symbol, you can see what they are. So it's looking for 5 types of error: spelling, grammar, deprecated items. Now that's specifically related to term basis. So we'll look at that. It's a little bit of a specialist use case, but also style and passive voice. So I can select just to look at certain ones in isolation, or I can just select them all and work my way through every suggestion. How do I do that? Well, you've got 2 options. So in the real-time checker, you can make the improvements in 2 ways. One is to work down through this sidebar here on the left-hand side. And as I click on each item, the little pop-up will expand, tell me the nature of the issue or the possible correction, and give me the options of what I can do with it. Now, I prefer to work in the body of the document itself. So I just go one by one, hovering over the underlined items in the body of the text. So you can see here, I'm hovering over the same item, the pop-up appears, gives me the message. I decide, is this correct? Is this correction what I want to do? And I can either accept it. If I accept it, I can choose which version to accept. I can click on this button to accept and move to the next item. I can ignore it. So if I think, no, actually, I'm using this spelling or this construction for a specific reason, I can ignore it. If I think it's a false positive, I can even report that to our NLP team. Or I can, if it's a case of a typo, I can add it to my dictionary too. There are various different notifications depending on the nature of the issue that it's found. So let's work through a few of these anyway, and you'll get the hang of it. So yeah, this is a spelling mistake, an obvious one. So I'm going to click here, move to the next item. Okay, right, I've got a missing determiner. What is a determiner? I'm not quite sure. Okay, here's an explanation about a determiner. So really take notice of that information icon there. A big part of ProWritingAid is about building your skills and capability as a writer over the long term. Okay, it is a sticking plaster, but we don't see ProWritingAid as a sticking plaster. Our intention is to build your skills and capabilities over time. So,
ultimately, we want you guys to need the program less and less and have fewer and fewer mistakes that you have to correct. So
that's exactly right. Okay, so I've learned a little bit about what a determiner is. I make the change, I move to the next item. Okay, carry out. Okay, we'll ignore this because it's a deprecated term, meaning it's in a term base for a client I'm working with, so we'll ignore that point. All of, okay, this is a classic readability issue. Generally, when we use the two words all of, it's unnecessary. They're superfluous. They don't add anything to the meaning of the sentence. So I can remove it quite safely, knowing that I'm not changing the meaning. I'm actually just saving the reader time and effort. So I move on. Okay, started doing another one here. Okay, we're kind of masking the verb, or we're using a weaker verb here. We're using two verbs rather than one. Rather than saying started doing, I can just say done. So you can see I'm incrementally improving the document just by working my way down through it using the real-time checker. How far am I improving it? Well, your goals sidebar will tell you exactly that. So in goals, so you can see I've got two tabs here, improvements and goals. In goals, it presents a range of metrics, and those metrics depend on the document type I've selected. So you can see here that I'm looking at goals like grammar, spelling, and style. They're always my top three. They are the most important in any piece of writing. I got style guide compliance, sentence length, business jargon, readability grade. Now, if I set my document type as something like a sales email, it's going to look at different measurements. Okay, it's looking at things like customer focus score, my positivity, my question count, my spam phrase count, the important things, metrics when you're measuring the success of a sales email. So choose your document type as closely as you can and use these goals as a way of measuring your quality assurance. So, or your benchmarks. What do you normally expect to hit? And you'll become familiar with these over time. We give you some examples. So for grammar, spelling, and style, our suggestion is that you should be hitting 80% or higher. In this document, I'm only hitting 39%, so I'm well below target. In sentence length, oh, let's have a look at, sentence length actually. My sentence length, and actually that's way above target too. Sentence variety, there we go. Sentence variety is in green, so that is on target. So my sentence variety target is 4 or higher, and my variety is actually hitting 5.2. Likewise, my passive voice index. So I haven't got too many passive constructions or passive sentences in this document. So I'm on target there. What I'm doing is very quickly getting an idea of where the weak spots are in my document and in my writing. Now, if you're managing a team, you can also use these metrics as a way of setting expectations for your team. So if you're in customer service, you might tell your team that they shouldn't be sending a customer email unless they're hitting 60 or 80 or whatever percentage for grammar, spelling, and style, for example. So the metrics are a relatively new addition to our real-time checker, but a really valuable one. I'd thoroughly recommend exploring them in more detail. Okay, so that's a real-time checker. It's the first thing, and quite often the constant thing I'd have running in the background if you're a regular writer. You can see there are around about 20 other buttons to hit here, and each of those produces a report on a different area of writing. We see writing as a range of skills, if you like. We break it down into a range of areas, and we treat it more as a science than an art. So if you can practice and improve specific building blocks, your writing muscle memory will get stronger and better over time. The place to start with all these reports, and before we go into this, the intention is not for you to run all 20 reports. You will be there all day examining the data. We want you, as most users do, to get into a habit of finding and using the reports that are most valuable to your writing style. So we all have strengths and weaknesses. So find the report that is most valuable and brings about the most improvements for your particular writing style. Most of our users get to a point where they're running usually, I'd say, between 3 and 4 reports on a regular basis. Now, understanding which reports are most valuable, obviously the name will ring out and stand out. So many of you who are writing reports or emails will think, yep, style and grammar, very important, readability important, possibly less so alliteration and homonyms. So some of these reports are more related to creative writers, for example. My recommendation is to start with the summary report. So that's where we'll begin right now. And the summary report breaks writing down into all of its component areas. And you can see, so it's a little bit like an expanded version of the goals sidebar we just looked at. You can see a whole range of metrics. So again, grammar, style, and spelling, but this time separated into their constituent units and their targets here in the same way as the goals sidebar. And then we group together all of the areas where your document's looking great. Now, if I want to find out more about any of these areas, because this is a really detailed report, I can just click on the subject and it will take me straight down to the relevant part of that summary report. And we try and make this as easy to understand as possible. So we use lots of visual illustrations. Here, where we're looking at readability, for example, we're at the upper end of the target range. You can see from this, this pie chart here that although I'm on target, around about 10% of my paragraphs in this document are classed as very difficult to read paragraphs. So that to me is a little bit of a red flag and actually something I might want to go and investigate in a minute. Let's pop back up to the top. Below all of these reports where it says I'm doing really well, you'll see a bunch of places where my document needs more work. Things like, so we know about grammar, style, and spelling, but also sentence length. So my average sentence length is too long. I'm using too much business jargon. And my glue index, this is a really interesting one. So we'll come on to look at glue indexes and sticky sentences in a moment. But for now, let's close this report and we'll dive in with style. So the style report, it works in a similar way to the real-time checker. And it breaks down. So what I mean by that is it has a sidebar here, and I can either navigate the sidebar or I can go into the document itself. But in the sidebar, you'll see it categorizes all of my improvements. So I've got readability enhancements, I've got passive voice issues, style improvements, subordinate clauses, and all sorts. Some of these will be familiar. So readability enhancements. Let's have a look at a couple of these. So a number of, okay, so rather than saying a number of, say several. Again, you're using one word instead of three, so you're saving your reader a little bit of time, a little bit of effort. So we'll make that change. Let's do quite. Yeah, okay, so quite often you can remove the word quite without changing the meaning of the sentence. Not always, so I may want to ignore it. I may want to ignore that. You'll see this has got a disable option here. Just be wary about using disable because it's a permanent feature. So if you disable a rule, to re-enable it, you'd need to contact our support team. I would advise using ignore rather than disable. You've also got the thesaurus option. So lots of the pop-ups will appear with the thesaurus option when you can look for synonyms. It may not find any. I can also, actually, this point is a good point to mention. We have a word explorer built into ProWritingAid. If I double click on any word, the word explorer opens, offers a range of synonyms for that particular word. And then I can open the full explorer and really go into detail on that word. Okay, so what's the full definition? Let's look at the thesaurus, so the synonyms for it. In fact, right down to things like collocations. So if you've got, words or you'd like to think of, you want some help with, got something on your tongue and you think, well, actually, what are the adjectives or adverbs that commonly come after that particular piece of vocabulary? This is a great place to research that and really build your knowledge.
Because that Colocation Dictionary is doing words based on their relative location. So if typically you have a certain adjective used before a certain noun, things like that, that will pop up in our Colocation Dictionary. So it's very helpful if you are suffering from tip of your tongue syndrome, because I think a lot of times we will remember a word that is attached to another one, and we can't seem to get the one that is attached. So that's where the Colocation Dictionary really comes in handy.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Thanks, Micah. Passive verbs, we haven't touched on these really yet. I'm going to take a quick look. So let's have a look at this one. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the passive voice, it's where we are usually putting the object of the sentence before the subject, and sometimes we omit the subject in its entirety. There are several reasons why we use passive voice. several good reasons why we may use the passive voice. But in business, we tend to overuse the passive voice. And one of the reasons is we think it sounds more formal and makes us sound more important. It's as simple as that. It doesn't. Actually, it puts another barrier in the way of your reader understanding, because they have to translate what you're saying in their minds. So we advocate the active voice. If you need or if you wanted a more detailed explanation, again, open the information icon, open the contextual learning window. And in this case, you'll even find an embedded video with some Jackie Chan examples demonstrating the difference between passive and active voice, just to reinforce that learning. And then you'll see our tool. So ProWritingAid is trying to look at the context of the sentence and suggest possible alternative active equivalents. So here, rather than saying the proposition has been accepted by the majority of our stakeholders, it's translating that into the majority of our stakeholders has accepted the proposition or have accepted the proposition. So you need to do a little bit of thinking there, which is most appropriate. But you can see there how the passive voice has switched the subject and the object in the position in the sentence. We can often see or identify the passive voice because it's got this agent, it's got the byword in there. And we're also using an auxiliary verb, so has been accepted. So if you can change that into the active voice, you're saving your reader time and effort.
And also, for those of you looking for a quick way to test whether something is passive voice, maybe you are writing something out by hand and don't have access to ProWritingAid, a good way of doing that is to take the verb and put by zombies behind it. And that's usually a good indicator of whether it's passive or not, because if it fits with the by zombies in the sentence, then it's probably passive.
Yeah, it's a great tip. Okay, so you'll see the work that I did in the real-time checker, we're now complementing that with more work in the style guide, in the style report. So we're over time, we're building and building and building and improving, but it is small steps. Okay, and that's what writing is. You're making improvements, you're one thing at a time. Let's have a look at another couple of reports. I think we said we were going to look at readability. I think that's right. So let's go there next. Now, readability is slightly different because with the readability report, it's doing a lot of work, but it's an advisory report. So it's highlighting improvements, but it won't necessarily make the improvements for you. Let me show you what I mean by that. So first of all, we've got some readability statistics. And I can see my Flesch-Kincaid grade here. Many of you will be familiar with that. The 9.4, it suggests that someone in grade 9 school could readily understand what I'm writing here. We would say 10 is an absolute maximum. You should always target your readability grade at 10 or below. Flesch reading use score 63.1. So at ProWritingAid, we say that your minimum Flesch score should be 60, ideally higher. Now in this document, you can see I've got a very difficult to read paragraph, and I can navigate to that very easily there, just by clicking on the little arrow. It highlights it and then tells me the Flesch reading use score for that particular paragraph. It will not rewrite that paragraph. And that's because the context of the sentence or the paragraph, sorry, means that there are too many possible rewrites. It would probably serve up somewhere in the region of 100 different variations of that paragraph for you to choose from. So you, as the writer, need to think and analyze this paragraph. And in order to prove the readability, the two things you need to focus on, one is sentence length and one is average word size, so average number of syllables per word. So you're specifically looking for the long, the long complex pieces of vocabulary, any words in there that you can reduce. So once you've done that, once you've chopped down those sentences, and let's have a look at this, because we could probably do this and run the report again. So this second sentence, our digital transformation team has been acting as the intermediary between the development and engineering team, technology team, sales team, marketing team, finance team, and the C-suite. So we could actually cut that down in many ways. I mean, you could just say between many teams, or you could actually cut that down and list the second, sales team, marketing team, finance team, C-suite in a separate sentence. That way you're introducing a break to your paragraph and you're helping your reader. So let's do that now.
And also in some of this rewriting, it is worth it to consider your reader's perspective. So I suppose, would this be a case that this person needs to know all of the different teams? In a lot of cases, if you're dealing with an external vendor, they may not need to know every single team that was involved. So it does work to say, hey, it's just between many teams. If you were speaking to somebody internally that basically kind of knows the structure of your organization and things like that, it might be worth it to reword it in a way that you have all of those teams listed out so that that person knows what teams are actually involved. So again, comes down to context, comes down to who is going to be reading what you're writing.
Yeah, absolutely that. We've got a couple of other words here. Expeditious stands out to me. So I might take that and say, well, the rest of the company is not quite as fast or is a little slower in catching up with us. There are many different ways, and that's the beauty of writing, right? But as Micah says, stop and think about your reader. That should govern everything here. What is the kind of language that will chime with them? How complex, how formal do they expect? How are you going to get them nodding along to what you're saying? But make these changes. Obviously, I mean, there are still some style change, some grammatical changes that need to be made here as well, spelling changes as well. But you'll see when I come to run the readability report now, it's still classed as a complex sentence, but the Flesch Reading E-score has come up a little bit. So few more attempts, a little bit more editing, keep running that report, and we'll get that right where we want it and where we need it to be. So you can see over time and with practice, it will, you can tackle any of these areas. Okay, so readability. Micah, we said we were going to go, I think, to do sticky sentences after that. Is that right?
I think sticky sentences, and then if we have time, the overused word report.
Okay. Sticky sentences is one of my favorites. So sticky sentences is, as far as I know, it's unique to ProWritingAid. And what sticky sentences is doing is analyzing every sentence for the presence of glue words. And glue words are the 200 most commonly used words in the English language. So they are typically your prepositions and your articles, words like that, that we use to glue together the working words in a sentence. The problem is, if we use too many sticky glue words, your sentence will become sticky. It will slow your reader down because you're basically padding your sentence out. You want to make sure that you are not using more than 40% of glue words in a sentence. So where we found two sticky sentences, let's just navigate to this first one. Yeah, and over 70% of the words in this sentence are glue words. You can see them listed here. Just, wanted to, back, about, the, around, last, or so. Now, there's no perfect rewrite for a sticky sentence. Again, it's up to you as the writer to rewrite this. You will know your reader and you'll know the context of the sentence better than anyone else. This is advising you that if you leave this sentence in, it's one of the areas where your reader will be slowed down and possibly could lose interest. So it's in your interest to make it shorter and snappier. So here, we can all look at this sentence and probably rewrite it in a different way. Just wanted to circle back about the project we talked about around the last month or so. I would just rewrite that as saying, just getting back in touch, or just wanted to circle back about the project. You could probably ditch this whole second part of the sentence. And unless you need to be specific about which project, maybe you should name the project. There are many, many different ways you could make that sentence simpler and clearer for your reader. We then run a sticky sentence report. Okay, it's still sticky, but actually, oh no, look at that. I need to do some more work on this. Okay, so you could just circle back. Or in fact, I might change that saying just coming back to you on the project, just getting back in touch. So you can see there are many different ways you could handle this. Likewise, the rest of the company is a little slow in catching up with us. So you could rewrite that, remove some of those glue words, and effectively engage your reader without putting these barriers in their way. I'd definitely recommend having a play around with the sticky sentences report and see what it does for you. Okay, let's have a final look before we go anywhere else at the all repeats report. Now, this one takes a few seconds to run. It's quite a complex report. Don't worry too much about the color in a document. It's the information in the sidebar that's important. So it's looking for repetition. So which words am I repeating? And also which multi-word phrases am I repeating? So let's start there. Okay, so you can see I'm using the term to carry out or to move forward twice. I'm using the term a bit and we can 4 times. Why is that important? Well, if this is a short document, repetition is one of the biggest turnoffs for a piece of writing and for your reader. It will slow them down. They will lose interest if you're just repeating yourself. So this is a great way of spotting those patterns. And these are the kind of patterns that we as human editors miss, because your eye, particularly if you're reading your own writing, your eye tends to glance over repetition. You don't recognize it as being as repetitive as it actually is. You can even, like I said, look at single words and which I'm using the most. And from there, you can navigate through some of these and it will list, for some examples, it will probably list, yeah, some alternatives. So there we go. Rather than saying to carry out, to bring out, to bear out, to drive out. So again, it's just helping you build some variety into your vocabulary. Okay. I think that's probably most of the reports we wanted to cover. How are we doing for time? We're doing okay for time. So at this point, I think what we'll do is dive into a little bit on customization. So if you're using ProWritingAid for your team, many of the teams we work with face issues with consistency. So how do you use a tool like ProWritingAid to enforce the writing style or the tone of voice that you advocate or that you document within your team? And the answer is within our style guide tool. So our style guide tool allows you to build custom tools which will appear just like every other rule you saw popping up in the real-time checker. You can build style guide rules for your own writing, but if you're part of a team, so if you have a team license, you can also build rules that are shared between all of your team's users. And rules can be incredibly simple, a little bit like a simple find and replace function in Word, but they can also be incredibly complex. And just a word of warning, if you enjoy studying language and you're a little bit of a linguist on the side, rules can be also incredibly addictive. A little bit of problem solving going on. Let's start with a really simple one. So the University of Pennsylvania, the brand name is University of Pennsylvania. It's not Pennsylvania University. Yet many staff and students use the term Pennsylvania University. So the solution is to create a very simple rule. We enter a wrong sentence, a sample wrong sentence that just contains the incorrect wording or phrasing within it. Then we specify the exact match we want the computer to look for. The replacement, so what is it we want to suggest instead? And then our message to the writer. Once we save that, let's just copy that example. Once we save that and go back into our document, if I just drop that sentence in and hit return and turn a real-time checker on, you'll see there is my rule. So there's my custom-made rule. I've built that. And that's a really simple example. It can get incredibly complex. The next step is really just to introduce what we call parts of speech tags. So they are POS tags. Here's a really good example for one. So the word impactful in the UK is what we describe as a Marmite word. You either love it or you hate it. Many people think that if you're going to use impactful, there is generally always a stronger, better adjective you can use instead. So this rule finds any use of the word impactful, but we're including RB as a match before that. Now, RB in linguistic tagging, so POS tagging, stands for adverb. So RB means adverb, and this little tilde here means it's a variable, an optional. So it's basically telling the machine that if impactful is preceded by an adverb, then we should include the adverb in the match. If there is no adverb in the sentence used, or preceding impactful rather, then we should still match impactful on its own. And we're going to offer 5 alternative adjectives which we think are better. And we separate each one by an @ symbol, because that then separates each into a clickable entity on the correction pop-up. And then we add the message. And again, we save it. We'll test it. We'll add it twice. And let's remove that adverb there. And you'll see, once again, there's my rule I've created. I can choose which is the best replacement adjective for that particular sentence. Whether it's got an adverb preceding it or not, it still matches. And I've made the change. So you can see it builds and builds. And then you can see some of the favorite rules. I think, Mike, you're a particular fan of this one. It's the Oxford comma rule. So here we're using a string purely of POS tags, so linguistic tags. And we're defining a match. We're basically saying, look for a string where we're using a singular or plural noun or verb or gerund, followed by a comma, followed by another singular or plural noun, verb or gerund, followed by a coordinating conjunction, a possible determiner or verb, and then finally a final singular plural noun, verb or gerund. So we have our string, that's what we're looking for. And obviously the missing point in here is there should be an Oxford comma before and, so that an Oxford comma before the coordinating conjunction. So the replacement uses what we call tokenization. We tokenize this whole string, starting from token 0. So token 0 through to token 5. That's 6 words in total, but we replace, or we add in rather, the comma, the Oxford comma before that coordinating conjunction. And in that way, you can create a rule that looks for the Oxford comma, which is a style issue. Whether you use the Oxford comma or not, it's neither correct or incorrect. It depends on the style of your organization. Now, we have a team who are fantastic at building style guides, or rather automating your style guides. So if this is something you need help with, get in touch. It's built so you can do it yourself. You can handle this yourself. But like I say, if you need help, if you've got a detailed guide, then we have a team on hand that we can commission this as a project for, and they will automate your entire style guide into ProWritingAid.
And Tom, we have actually got several great questions on style guides, so I think we probably need to move to maybe a bit of a mix of our Q&A as well as some of our tools. So one of our users, attendees, has asked, can several people use the same style guide if they're in a team?
Yes, they can. Great question. So you probably saw here personal. Okay, so this is my personal style guide. This is just for my documents that I create here. However, if I scroll down quite a way, I've got quite a few rules, but here we go, PWA team. So these are my team rules. So these rules will apply to Micah's documents as well. So anybody within the ProWritingAid team, these rules will be enforced in their documents too. And that's wherever you write. So, and sorry, I'm just going to go off a slight tangent because we've done all this in the real-time checker, in the web editor. But if I were to open, let's say, the Word add-in, you can see I've got ProWritingAid working here. Those style guide rules will apply here as well. And even in, I think somewhere around here, I've got the, let me just, yeah, here we've got a Chrome extension working. Let me just turn the Chrome extension on. And you'll see exactly the same thing is happening with the real-time checker. It will do, there we go, it's all highlighted. And those style guide rules will apply here. So once you set those rules within your account on the website, they will apply to any integration, any way you use ProWritingAid, to your team if you set them under teams, or to your own personal documents if you put them under personal.
And a related question is, can you create different style guides and select which one should apply to a document?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. It's something we've been working through this year, in fact. You can, the way that we handle that is by setting up separate teams. So you can be a member of different teams, and you can select which team you are working within for each document, if you like. So those style rules will apply for that particular document. So that's how we handle style guide selection. But it's an area that we realize that many of our business customers, our corporate customers really, really value. So we're doing some more work around style guide improvements as well. But yeah, so the simple answer is yes, but we handle that through setting up multiple teams.
And just in the interest of time for everyone, we do have another user that is interested in finding out more about our term base. They have a very comprehensive glossary set up in Google Sheets and wanted to know if there's a way to integrate that with ProWritingAid.
There is, yeah, another interesting question. We haven't quite got onto this yet. So you can see I'm logged into ProWritingAid here. And from my account page or my profile page, I can access this menu on the left-hand side. Just appears from this drop down, this hamburger menu here. All the things I've shown you today are within here. So documents, where we were editing documents, style guides. If I go to term base, now term base is a really important function for many of our corporate users. Once again, in fact, I was talking to a customer today who has a term base of 130,000 terms. So for those of you who don't know, that is where they have maybe kind of like a custom dictionary. And they want to upload that. So all of those terms are then not flagged as spelling mistakes or typing mistakes within a document. So they're recognized as preferred terms, or you may have deprecated terms. I mentioned this way back at the beginning. You may have product names, for example, that have changed. So in a term base, you can list a deprecated term and the current used term. So it will highlight any deprecated terms, and in the pop-up, it will say, please use such and such instead. Now, to upload a term base is really straightforward. If you go to the term base page here, you can download a template. It's a really simple CSV template. It's quite understandable, quite easy to understand, and there are some examples in there. If you've already got an existing term base, you should be able to match very easily your terms and to set the columns in the term base correctly. So it will ask you things like whether you want to flag other punctuation or other casing. So you set that as either yes or no, or false or positive. And you can see the kind of terms I've got installed into my term base. And once again, you can set a personal term base, or you can set a team term base. So hopefully that answers your questions. My recommendation would be have a look at the term base. If you need help, do contact us. I'm more than happy to arrange a call just to help you get that uploaded. Okay.
I think that may have covered. Did we want to go a little bit more into the Chrome extension, or shall we move on to Q&A?
Well, let's just say what I wanted to point out we haven't done in the Chrome extension is just how to really access the full editor, because so many of our business users particularly use the Chrome extension. You can use it in pretty much every application you're using, whether it's Gmail, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Salesforce. If I click, so you can see the real-time checker is working automatically. I turn it on and off in my editor browser extension pop-up up here. You can see once again, I can set my language type and my writing style. And then within the actual document, I can click on this little target indicator to open the full ProWritingAid editor. First thing that appears is the goals and improvements sidebar that you're by now familiar with, but I can also open the full editor. And here's what I mean about us trying to use the same UI. So it's instantly kind of recognizable. You know where you are, you know what the reports mean, because once a full editor appears, it's exactly the same format as you saw in the web editor, and the same set of reports you see in the Word add-in too. I can make all of my changes here. Here's a couple of the spelling changes that I didn't make earlier. Let's ignore that. And then I can apply the changes back into my document. So it's really, really straightforward. So I just wanted to highlight that, Micah, before we move on. But yeah, let's move on to any questions we have.
And guys, we have a couple that we're going to go ahead and start off with, but please feel free if you have other questions, go ahead and throw those in the Q&A box or the chat, and we will get on those. So one of our other questions that we have is is it possible to limit the number of times that, say, passive voice is marked as incorrect? Because it sometimes may be necessary to use the passive voice, and this user is wondering, if that blanket approach, it doesn't make it a little more difficult on their workflow. And to me, Tom, I think this might sound like a good case for perhaps disabling a rule, or perhaps ignoring.
Yeah, I would ignore. I think the short answer is no. We can't set a tolerance for the passive voice at the moment. This is one of these areas that we're looking at. We're doing lots of kind of development of the tool all the time. So it is something we look at on a regular basis. But right now, you can't set a tolerance for the passive voice as such. We recognize that there is a good use case and good reasons why you may want to use the passive voice, but we strongly believe that 80 to 90% of uses of the passive voice could be better served by using the active voice. So we will always flag the passive voice. However, if you use the ignore button, as you can see here, it will remember that ignore. So if you ignore that instance of the passive voice, next time you open that same document, it will continue to ignore that point. That's what I would recommend. I wouldn't disable. It's one of the rules I probably least likely to disable, unless perhaps that there may be some very good reason why the field that you work in demands that you use the passive voice wherever possible. But I'd be very surprised. Even most law firms that I've worked with recognize that although they heavily use the passive voice, that's generally because that's what they've always done. Once you challenge it, and they start using the active voice, they see the improvements and see the improvements from the reader's point of view, at least.
And then also a point on the sentence rewriter here with the passive voice, because our user did also mention that sometimes that can distort the meaning. Again, this is up to you being in the driver's seat and you being the writer. AI right now can only do so much to correctly rephrase a sentence. So at times it may come up with a slightly less clear version of that sentence. In those cases, you might want to look at it and say, okay, do I have a better way of rephrasing this sentence myself so that it's clear from the start and in the active voice? So again, this comes back to not every single suggestion is going to be a total perfect fit. You're in the driver's seat.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay, and then we actually have a great one that I do want to dive into that is not necessarily about the tool, but just in writing in general, because this is a great one. So there was that discussion that we had of that sentence that involved, many different teams, that we had that listing of all of those different teams. So this user is asking, with regard to readability and listing for that example, all the divisions of the company, would it help to create a bullet pointed list below the paragraph? And the answer there is yes, absolutely. This goes back to a concept of white space in writing. So I think everyone's very familiar with this in art, with white space and, say, negative space. I think we're very used to talking about that, but we very rarely talk about that in writing. And you can see here, we have these paragraphs kind of delineated by at least having a blank space between each one. But I want you guys to imagine all of that is crammed together. That's just reduced the amount of white space you have on that page drastically, and it just gives your reader this just instant, just kind of cringing reaction. So anytime that you have a place where you can add in white space by adding bullet points, by dividing up paragraphs, by putting spacing in between paragraphs, then that's going to be beneficial for your reader because it gets past that initial cringe, essentially.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, we could do a whole session on document design. I think there are all sorts of, like leading, for example. So the actual space between each line and the width. So I've got a really wide width on this, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend writing with right to the page edge like that, because it's causing your reader to really work from one side to the other and then have to move the head all the way back to the beginning again. So like Micah says, white space is a place to start. Let your reader's eyes relax, and you'll do that by creating those spaces away from your text.
And another bit of advice for those of you that may be dealing in more digital formats. always try to test your message within the medium that you're going to be sending it in. So if you guys are familiar with, say, LinkedIn direct messages, that's a very, very narrow column width. So even a very short message that on an email might only look like it's a couple of sentences can look like a huge chunk of text and suffer from that wall of text syndrome. So it does help to try to adjust your, I suppose, formatting of your messaging to the medium you're actually sending it.
Yeah, absolutely. And forgive me, I'm just as we're talking, I'm just making some more changes. Whenever I sit here with these changes flashing, I want to edit this document into shape. So you can see though how you just continue working on this and improving over time. Anyway, how are we doing for questions, Mike? Are there any others?
We actually have another great one. You guys keep them coming. This has been a fantastic Q&A today. Can ProWritingAid check for plagiarism?
Yes, it can. Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see it. If I go to more reports, we've got so many reports, I can't actually fit them on the screen. The last one is plagiarism. The plagiarism report will scan millions of web pages for original copy. So it produces a very simple report. It does take some time to run, depending on the length of your document, but it will be looking for quoted and unquoted, original and non-original text. It will tell you and highlight any areas that are unoriginal text and whether you are quoting them or not. So if you're looking for a plagiarism tool built in, then that's a perfect solution for you. We do in terms of, okay, so there we can see there's nothing to worry about in this particular document. Nothing's been copied, whether it's quoted or unquoted. We do have a version of our premium license that's called Premium Plus, which includes plagiarism checks. I think with each plagiarism check, you can check around about, let's say 2,000 words, I think. I should know this, and I'm sorry I've forgotten. But yeah, it's the perfect solution if you're looking for a plagiarism tool to help while you're doing your editing.
Okay, and we have another question that's circling back to style guides, that the teamwork around is working great if you have a team. But how can you enable multiple style guides if you are an individual? And Tom, this may sound like a case for our individual business license to me.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the scenario there where you would, so you're essentially, so I guess if you are serving different customers.
Yeah,
So
I
maybe
could think
freelance.
that perhaps as a copywriter, if you have multiple style guides for multiple clients, I could see that easily applying to an individual.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. And I think probably the answer would be a little bit like you say, Micah. It would probably be a case of an individual business license. And then again, using the Teams functionality. So although we'd call it Teams, you would set up several teams. You're effectively setting up several style guides, one per team. You would simply give maybe each team the name of whichever client the style guide relates to. But it's certainly something we can do. It may need some kind of help with our customer service team, but that's something we could definitely set up.
And it's good for us to have that because we can always throw that to product and we may be able to put that in the product map for later on. So
Correct.
Always great to get feedback from you guys because that lets us tailor the product to your needs.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we have the Q&A cleared out. Does anyone have any more questions? You guys have been a very active group and we greatly appreciate it. It's always great to have so many questions to answer. Give everybody just a moment in case anyone is typing furiously with a long question.
Don't forget, if you do have questions after the fact, you can always contact us through social channels, so Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter too, or reach out to our support team.
Right. And guys, you will also be getting a recording of this in a follow-up email tomorrow that's going to be coming through Zoom. So your recording will be linked there. And also any of these, you can always go back to our YouTube channel and you can see it on our YouTube channel as well.
That's right. And there's a huge amount of content on our YouTube channel. We break it down into playlists. So you'll find a whole section there about how to use ProWritingAid and ProWritingAid guides. But please, if you get stuck with anything, do reach out. One of the great things about our team, we're all writers and we love talking to writers. So If there's anything you need to help get started with ProWritingAid or get you to an advanced level even, just let us know.
And just one more question that we have on the purpose of that by zombie test. So that is if you are trying to identify passive voice and you don't have ProWritingAid on your shoulder handy and you just need to test that out, you would simply take that by zombies phrase, place it after the verb. So if we have the food was eaten, it's something similar to that. So if we have food, that would be probably the start of a passive sentence. So if we added the food was eaten by zombies, that sentence makes sense. So therefore it's likely a passive sentence. Isn't totally a foolproof trick, but if you're writing out something by hand or trying to get something down in a speech or something like that, it can be just a useful little trick. Okay. And guys, I think that caps us off for this session. Thank you all. We greatly appreciate it, and we are looking forward to seeing you guys in 2022. We have the second of our Better Business Writing Workshop series that is going to be up in January. That's going to be the second week in January. So keep an eye on your emails for that. Basically, we're going to be doing a great session that's going to be around writing emails that get action and get read. So it's going to be a really, really great one. We're all looking forward to it. Like I said, keep an eye on your inboxes. We've got a lot more great things in store for 2022 as well. All right. So again, thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks everybody for joining us. See you again in the new year.